Welcome to Tomorrow Today, where we take an inside look at how weather is impacting organizations around the world and the unique ways they're combating the impact. Brought to you by Tomorrow.io, the world's leading weather intelligence and climate adaptation platform.
Hi, Clayton. How's it going?
Good.
Good. I am so excited to talk to you today about your experience with the hurricane hunters. I know you recently got to fly on one of those planes, so super excited to chat about that today. Before we get started, though, can you give us a short introduction and maybe talk to us a little bit about what your role is at Tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm a senior radar scientist in the Space and Sensors department here at Tomorrow.io. I've been with the company for almost 2 years. The start of October will be my 2-year anniversary. In that time, I've worked a lot on the airborne campaign, which is a component of the calibration validation campaign for our spaceborne radars.
Cool. Awesome. So I know you recently got to fly on a Hurricane Hunters plane. Before we start talking about your experience, can you maybe set the scene for us? What is the current process for getting hurricane related weather information?
Yeah, so what you see on the TV or read in the news, those forecasts typically come in the US almost solely from the National Hurricane Center. And
Mm.
that's a division within NOAA and the National Weather Service. They issue forecasts that are passed out. Their forecasts and models are informed by data that's collected by aircraft and satellite when available. The aircraft provide a critical measurement that really can't be made any other way. They provide data on the location, the trajectory, and the internal structure of the storm.
Interesting. How long are these flights typically? Like, how long was the one that you were on?
The flights I've been on, they can be up to 8+ hours, and that usually includes maybe an hour or up to 2 hours taxiing out to the storm. And then you have several hours in the storm. The
Mhm.
typical mission will fly into the eye and then back out of the eye about 3 times to sample the storm. When you're on the flight, every time you get in the eye, the pilots will try to locate the center of the storm to track it, track the motion of it. And then after those 3 passes are completed, depending on how much time is allotted, there can be additional research objectives added on.
Okay. So I know not very many people get to go on these flights. Can you maybe set the scene for us? What is it like being on that plane?
The plane, well, it's pretty bumpy, is the truth. Yeah, but the plane, it's a P3 and it's really solid and the pilots are really good and you have this sense of safety that even though the plane's bouncing around, you feel pretty safe in a way that maybe isn't always there on commercial planes.
Hmm.
Um, when I've flown, I've been on the afternoon missions and into the night. And usually the first pass, when you get into the eye, you have a pretty good look around and it's scenic. And then beyond that, it gets dark and it's stormy. Mostly you just see lightning through the windows. On board the plane itself, it's maybe there's 10 to 15 people on the plane, depending on the crew and the mission. And it's pretty roomy in there. You have nice, comfortable seats, and there's a galley in the back with a table and a kitchen. People are pretty friendly on the flight. Everybody's working hard and there's a lot to do, but people definitely want to talk about the storm and about the data that's being collected.
So, what was your specific role on the plane?
I work with the NOAA NESDIS STAR team,
Okay.
and we have two instruments that we're collaborating with them on.
Hmm.
KaIA, which is an altimeter. It measures significant wave height. And
Hmm.
then IRAP is a conically scanning radar. It's an imaging radar. It measures Doppler wind speeds um, from the aircraft down to the ocean surface. And
Hmm.
it also has a scatterometry product that provides measurements of wind speed at the surface. So these instruments, they both use Tomorrow IO Arena software-defined radars. And then there's a bunch of code that I've worked on the last couple of years that runs in real time, processing the data. to make the retrievals for the wind speeds on IRAP. So when I'm on the plane, my job is to make sure those radars are operating correctly, make sure the software is operating correctly, fix any problems, and then do analysis of the data, make sure that the data is correct before we pass it on to NHC or other people who might want to use it.
Wow. Okay. How do systems like IRAP and KaIA improve our understanding of hurricanes? Like I know you talked a little bit about how they work with our arenas, but how is that data being
Yeah.
used at the end?
So KaIA and IRAP, they really complement the other instruments on the aircraft. They provide measurements that aren't made by the, let's say, the tail Doppler radar or the radiometer SFMR.
Mhm.
IRAP in particular, it gives a really good look at the vector field of wind vectors going down to the ocean surface. And when you look at that, you can get a lot of information on the structure of the storm. You can see how the shear forces change the wind vector field. You can see how the drag from the ocean surface can bend the wind speeds lower. You can get a lot of really detailed information about the internal structure of the storm. With KaIA, we're providing significant wave height measurements, and we're doing it at a resolution and that wasn't previously available. And those are important to help inform models and forecasts that predict the sea state, and eventually that can turn into a storm surge. Like we saw with Lee, there was a big concern about storm surge on the East Coast. So KaIA measurements can feed into that.
That's crazy. And we do that for every storm, correct?
So there's two aircraft, and our instruments are on one of them, 42 this year. And that one's called Kermit is its nickname. And then Miss Piggy is N43. So there's two aircrafts, and our instruments are on one of them. And, as long as that aircraft flies, we're making those measurements.
How many flights go out per storm? Are you guys just chasing it the whole time or
Yeah, it can be quite a lot. For Lee, there were a ton of storms, and they alternate the aircraft. So there's really two flights into the storm every day. And I think for Lee, that continued for well over a week. So, maybe 10 plus flights.
what is the most challenging aspect of being on these flights?
The work conditions, I would say, is the most challenging. You have to really be careful about, just you got to think about what you eat. You have to think about how much water you're drinking. You have to think about things like what's the resolution on your computer so you don't get like tunnel vision looking at,
Mm.
some small font, and just trying to work in those conditions. Every now and then you're bumping up and down. So it's like trying to write code or write a report while you're on a roller coaster. I mean, it's fun, but it can be challenging for that. I take motion sickness medication because otherwise I just can't
Yeah.
do it. The other real challenging thing is just the travel. You have to have pretty flexible travel plans. And, the tasking is only made a day or two in advance and is subject to change. If other storms that are higher importance maybe come up, the tasking can change for that. So you have to be really flexible. And, sometimes maintenance is required. And that can be a little
Mhm.
frustrating because you're ready to collect data and the plane is grounded for maintenance reasons. Even though
And
the mechanics are really good and they work really hard, it's just their old aircraft. They're from 76, I think, is when they started flying.
oh
And
wow.
they've just been through a lot of storms and need maintenance.
And how long are you typically on the plane collecting data for?
I think somewhere between 4 to 6 hours collecting data, and
Mhm.
then, maybe 1 to 2 hours each way getting to the storm and then getting back.
That's crazy. Do you guys does the plane fly out of a local airport to that storm or
Yeah, there's a couple different spots. So the home base is the NOAA's Aircraft Operation Center, and that's in Lakeland, Florida, halfway between Tampa and Orlando. And they have a hangar there, and that's the home base. But then they have other airports that they fly out of a lot. One I flew out of was in St. Croix in the Virgin Islands.
Mhm.
Right now, they're actually up in Bermuda flying into Hurricane Nigel, which isn't, going to impact the US, so it
Mhm.
doesn't have as much coverage, but they're still taking measurements on it.
Gotcha. That's so cool. Do you have any plans to go on any other flights in the future?
Yeah, I don't know about this year. We'll see how it plays out, but it's nice to get on them at least once a year to make sure everything's running correctly and check it out. We'll see. I think that, well, we're putting another radar on the aircraft later this year. And so I think Brad Isom here at Tomorrow IO, he's probably going to go out on those flights, would be my guess, later this year.
Cool. I'll have to have a chat with him too. That's awesome. So, a couple more questions for you. In your opinion, what new radar capabilities or improvements to existing systems are needed for the Hunters aircraft? You just told me the aircraft is old. What other things
Yeah,
do you think we could
that's the main thing
improve?
that needs to be modernized. I think it's getting close to end of life. But as far as the instruments go, on the current aircraft, I think there's some room for uh, some investigation into more of the structure of the precipitation within the storm, and then the wind speed. We're starting to get there with IRAP, but more measurements of the wind speed from the plane down to the surface, and especially in these KA and KU bands that are really sensitive to precipitation. Those are maybe underrepresented on the plane, and so they could be insightful and collect new data.
That's cool. What was the most rewarding aspect of getting to do this?
For me, it's really working with the team at Nesdis. They're really great. They're insightful researchers, and it's really interesting to work with them and learn with them, and talk about all the details of the measurements in the storm. So that's one really, really rewarding thing. And the other is just to be around the crew and watch them operate the plane. They're all really professional and very skilled. The maintenance people are great, the pilots are amazing, and they operate in incredibly harsh conditions, and they're really good.
Yeah, I can only imagine having to do that constantly, getting used to the
Yeah.
turbulence. That would be insane.
Being, traveling so much too, not just the turbulence, but they'll be out, for weeks at a time in Bermuda and St. Croix. And well, it sounds like a vacation. It's, a lot of work for everyone.
Do you know what that team is doing outside of like hurricane season? Because like we don't have hurricanes year round, right?
Right. There's other projects that the plane is used for. Sometime off season is just dedicated to maintenance,
Mm.
but there's the winter flights, and we participated in those last year. Ricky Roy went on those flights, and they fly out of Alaska and into some of the storms in the Bering Sea and the Gulf of Alaska. And it's a different set of measurements there. But over the winter, there's a lot of storms up there, so they make a lot of interesting measurements. Things that we aren't involved with, I've heard that maybe they chase tornadoes sometimes, but
Oh.
I don't know if that's true. I just heard some people talking about that. And I
Mhm.
think there's other projects that go on.
Yeah, that's awesome. One final question for you. How do you think that the Tomorrow IO satellite constellation will affect hurricane hunting in the future or the ability to see them? Will it have any impact?
Well, I think it'll make a lot of impact in the modeling. It'll definitely help the forecasters, given more satellite coverage, and especially there's not a lot of precipitation radars in orbit right now, so this will be providing a lot of information that just isn't there. And it'll be very interesting to see how the forecasters and the models use that information. I still think there's going to be a place for an aircraft with specific instruments to actually get inside the storm and really study it up close. But I think there's a lot of benefit that the constellation is going to provide.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Clayton. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about your experience on the Hurricane Hunters flight. It sounds insane.
All
But
right. Well, thanks. Thanks, Ruth.
you're so welcome.